Amon Göth. It is early September 1946. The Third Reich, which once terrorized the entire European continent, has been reduced to smoldering ash. The men who once proclaimed themselves the master race now stand trembling in the dock, awaiting their final judgment. Among them stands a towering figure, nearly 6 feet 4 inches, cast under the long shadow of the gallows. Yet even facing the end, he offers a defiant Hitler salute. He is the architect of some of the most sadistic, inhumane atrocities of World War II. His execution was a mercy compared to the agony and barbaric torture he inflicted on countless others. This was a man who used prisoners for target practice as part of his morning routine. A man who unleashed rabid dogs on defenseless victims within the concentration camp where he ruled like a self-styled king. If you're not familiar with the depths of Nazi depravity, I'd bet you can't even imagine the brutality of the torture methods he employed. By the way, if you want a dedicated video breaking down those specific methods, drop a 1 in the comments to let me know. But that's not all. Here was a fanatic screaming Heil Hitler while simultaneously taking bribes and skimming off the top of the Reich. Ironically, it was this monster's sheer laziness and bottomless greed that unwittingly paved the way for the survival of 1,200 people he considered human garbage. If you're looking for a Nazi who was as purely evil as he was an accidental savior, no one fits the bill quite like this man. Welcome to the file on Amon Göth. The year is 1908. Vienna, the beating heart of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, is at the height of its opulence. And there, on December 11th, a baby's cry rings out. That child is Amon Leopold Göth. If you looked at his birth certificate, you'd think this kid had hit the jackpot. He was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. His family was wealthy, filthy rich actually. His father, the tycoon Amon Franz, controlled a thriving publishing empire specializing in military and religious texts. But life has a twisted sense of humor. Having money doesn't guarantee happiness. Amon Göth grew up in a sprawling villa that was physically massive but emotionally hollow, void of warmth or the laughter of family. His father was a workaholic, constantly traveling on business. His mother was buried in her work, up to her eyes in running the company. Young Amon was treated like an expensive piece of furniture left to collect dust in the corner. He was raised primarily by relatives throughout his childhood and teenage years. Sure, he ate meals prepared by private chefs and dressed in the finest silks, but he was starving for the one thing a growing boy needs most: a hug and attention from his parents. During those long, lonely nights in Vienna, the boy's soul began to warp. He didn't look at his parents with respect. He looked at them with resentment. He felt like a sacrifice placed on the altar of profit. And as you know, when a child isn't taught how to love, it's not a difficult leap for them to learn how to hate. It was this bone-chilling isolation that planted the seeds for the violent, ruthless personality of the future butcher. Refusing to live in the massive shadow of his father's publishing company, Göth turned his back on the path laid out for him. His true obsession was sports, any sport where the body could be pushed to the limit and emotions could be unleashed. After graduating high school, Göth chose agriculture as his escape route, but after just a few semesters, he dropped everything. Eventually, with reluctance and conflict, Göth returned to take the reins of the family business, a decision born not out of passion, but out of pressure and fate. Time flew by in the blink of an eye. In 1925, Amon entered university. At that age, on the cusp of adulthood, facing physical and psychological changes, most young men dream of romance or a career. But Amon, he dreamed of violence. He was sick of the golden boy image. He wanted to smash the fake order of his family life. And he found his drug of choice, Nazism. Years later, Göth would claim that it was his university classmates who radicalized him. In 1925, Amon joined the youth wing of the Austrian Nazi Party. During this period, the Austrian Nazis were ramping up a campaign of terror across the country. Beatings, robberies, bombings, and murders were their standard operating procedure. At this point, the Nazis weren't a dominant force yet. They were more like a gang of malcontents. But for Amon, that was enough. He found the thing he had always lacked: recognition and the feeling of belonging to a pack. He was sent to the Weidhofen Agricultural College. His parents hoped he would settle down and study, but Amon dropped out after just a few months. How could dull agricultural textbooks compare to the marches, the thunderous chants, and the surge of power he felt when donning that uniform? He was far more addicted to extreme politics than he was to being a bookworm. From 1927 to 1930, Amon underwent a complete metamorphosis. From a Vienna rich kid, he transformed into a political thug. He joined the Heimwehr, Home Guard, in Styria, a paramilitary group notorious for its anti-Semitic ideology. It was here that Amon learned the devil's lesson. The Jews are the cause of all suffering. It was a twisted, toxic ideology poured into the ears of a man already filled with personal resentment. It was like tossing a match into a tank of gasoline. It ignited instantly. Amon Göth found his purpose, destroying others to fill the emptiness inside himself. The peak of this corruption arrived in the early 30s. In 1931, Amon officially became a member of the Nazi Party with card number 510764. A year later, in 1932, he put on the SS uniform, bearing the number 43,673. He joined the party and the SS before Hitler rose to absolute power in Germany. In Nazi circles, men like Amon were called the Alte Kämpfer, the old fighters. This was a title of immense power. It proved he wasn't just an opportunist jumping on the bandwagon when the party had already started. He was a fanatic, a true believer from the very beginning. He took pride in the title Old Fighter. By this time, Amon Göth was no longer the abandoned son of a publishing tycoon. He was a sharpened cog in Hitler's killing machine, just as it was beginning to turn. Up to this point, Amon Göth's life didn't yet smell of blood or gunpowder, but it shows us the anatomy of a monster. I have to wonder, if Amon's parents had spent a little less time making money and a little more time caring for their son, would the world have one less butcher of Plaszow? Do you think that all children who grow up without parental affection are destined to rebel and develop extremist ideologies? The year is 1933. Hitler seizes power in Germany, but back in Amon's homeland of Austria, the Nazi Party is strictly banned. For a fanatic like him, this wasn't the end of the road. It was a declaration of war. Amon Göth officially went underground. He was no longer the Vienna rich kid. He transformed into a professional smuggler. In the bone-chilling winter nights along the Austro-German border, a shadowy figure could be seen moving weapons, explosives, money, and secret messages for the Nazi underground. He lived like a rat, dodging Austrian police warrants and using the darkness as his only shelter. By 1934, things escalated. While there is still some debate, substantial evidence confirms that Amon participated in a shocking operation: the failed coup to overthrow the Austrian government and the assassination of Chancellor Engelbert Dollfuss. Gunfire erupted across Vienna. Chancellor Dollfuss was gunned down, his blood staining his office floor, but the coup was a catastrophic failure. The government struck back hard, cracking down on the Nazis. Thousands were arrested, including Göth. Do you think he rotted in prison? No, he escaped. He ran for his life across the border into Germany. But even after officially working within the Reich, he continued smuggling arms and intel back to the Austrian Nazis. In Dachau, he entered an SS training camp, the Nazis' factory for monsters. There, he learned how to switch off his humanity. He was taught that compassion was a weakness, a trait of the inferior. The years 1934 to 1937 were a lull in his symphony of violence. His SS career stalled due to internal politics. He retreated to work for his father's publishing house, married his first wife, Olga Januszek, and divorced her just as quickly. Soon after, he abandoned the Catholic Church entirely.
But the real turning point came in 1938 with the Anschluss, Germany's annexation of Austria. Amon Göth returned to Vienna not as a fugitive, but as a conqueror.
In October 1938, he married his second wife, Anna Geiger, but this was no ordinary wedding. To marry an SS officer, the couple had to undergo a sickening vetting process, a racial purity test. SS doctors measured skulls and noses and scrutinized family trees back 3 generations to ensure not a single drop of Jewish blood existed. Here was a man who treated human life like trash, yet was obsessively meticulous about choosing a wife to protect the bloodline. To him, marriage wasn't about love, it was a biological mission to breed a master race. They had 3 children, But tragedy struck. Their firstborn died of leukemia at just 7 months old. Did Amon shed a tear? Maybe. But the truth is, he hardened into a block of ice, ready to take his anger out on the entire world. Göth continued working at his father's publishing firm while openly enforcing Nazi policies. In 1939, World War II exploded. The gates of hell are thrown wide open. By this time, Göth had earned the title of Old Guard thanks to his party membership dating back to 1925. He had also joined the SS in 1930 and became a full member in 1933. Perhaps because of this pedigree, Göth was chosen for a specific mission. When the war broke out, he was still in Vienna. But the moment the Wehrmacht conquered Poland, he received new orders. He proudly boasted in his personnel file that in early 1940, he was selected to serve in a Sonderkommando unit, a special squad. Now, usually, Sonderkommando refers to Jewish prisoners forced to dispose of bodies in death camps under threat of death. However, in this context, it referred to SS units tasked with ruthless enforcement. His first assignment was in Upper East Silesia, in what is now southwestern Poland. Here, he worked under a man named Albrecht Schmelt. Göth's job was to segregate ethnic Germans from Jews. He would round people up, assign labor, and tally the Jewish workforce. It was here that Amon Göth had an epiphany, a cruel realization that would define his style of rule. Killing Jews wasn't just a political duty, it was an economic goldmine. Instead of immediate execution, he realized he could squeeze every drop of labor out of them first. He learned how to manage forced labor camps. He viewed the prisoners not as humans, but as biological batteries. Use them until they are drained, then discard them. His greed became bottomless. He shook down victims for jewelry and valuables before sending them to their deaths. This greed would eventually lead to his downfall, but in 1940 to 1941, it made him a terror. Göth helped overhaul Schmelt's forced labor system. He generated so much profit that Schmelt was able to send millions of Reichsmarks back to the government, while stealing enough to buy a mansion and pocket $40,000 in cash for himself. These years turned Göth into a beast. He began to view the enslavement, exploitation, and murder of Jews simply as a business opportunity. Göth helped Schmelt make a fortune and was praised repeatedly for it. This success punched his ticket to the next level. Summer 1942. Through his superior Schmelt, Amon was promoted and transferred to the Lublin district, serving under Odilo Globotnik, one of the most brutal executioners in Nazi history. Globotnik was the architect of Operation Reinhard in Poland. Reinhard was the code name for the Holocaust. Göth was now a player in the secret plan to exterminate all Jews in Poland. His mission? Liquidating the ghettos. Göth was one of 450 hand-picked SS men selected to implement the genocide in Poland. From 1942 to 1943, he was Globotnik's trusted henchman, tasked with the dirtiest work. His SS file remains somewhat vague due to the secrecy of Operation Reinhard, but witness testimonies have pieced together his actions during these 6 months. Göth organized the deportation of Jews in the region. He ensured that factories run by slave labor operated efficiently, and Globotnik gave him free access to inspect the 3 death camps operating at the time. There are even rumors that Göth contributed to the development of gas chambers to make them more lethal and efficient. Picture Amon Göth standing tall, pistol in hand, screaming orders as thousands of elderly people, women, and children are dragged from their homes in the middle of the night amidst heart-wrenching screams. He didn't just give orders, he participated. He shot those who walked too slow. He beat anyone who dared to look him in the eye. He herded victims onto suffocating cattle cars destined for the death camps of Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka. His dedication was so terrifying that it shocked even his superiors and petrified his victims. They gave him a name that smells of death, the Butcher of Plaszow. He was drunk on the power of holding life and death in his hands. By now, the human inside Amon was dead. Only the animal remained, baring its fangs. From a muddy smuggler, Amon Göth had climbed the ranks to become a powerful SS officer. But scarier than his rank was the transformation of his soul. He had found the devil's formula: violence plus greed plus racism equals absolute power. 1942 closed with Amon Göth receiving transfer orders. Rumor has it that due to conflicts with one of Globoknik's peers, Göth left his post for a new assignment, liquidating the Krakow ghetto and moving the survivors to a new forced labor camp. History focuses heavily on Göth's brutality during his command of the Plaszow camp. This is the place that would forever link his name to eternal cruelty, the place where he would build his own private kingdom and crown himself God. February 11, 1943. Amon Göth arrives at the Krakow-Plaszow concentration camp. He was 34 years old, a towering giant standing nearly 6 feet 4 inches with a beer belly starting to show, but with eyes as cold and sharp as a razor. He was appointed commandant. This wasn't just an administrative title. This was a coronation for a king without a crown. In this kingdom of barbed wire, he decided who lived, who died, who ate, and who starved. In his opening speech as the commander of the newly established camp, Göth told his new prisoners, "I am your God." And he wasn't exaggerating. In those early days, his power was absolute. There was no law here. The law was whatever mood Amon Göth happened to be in. March 1943. Just 1 month after taking office, Amon Göth directed the liquidation of the Krakow ghetto. In reality, it was a public massacre. It's worth noting that 3 of the 5 criminal charges brought against him after the war were directly linked to the exploitation, deportation, and murder of tens of thousands of Jews during the liquidation of the Krakow and Tarnów ghettos, as well as the dismantling of the Zebny labor camp. Amon Göth didn't sit in an office barking orders. He walked straight into the chaos, gun in hand. He shot anyone moving too slowly. He shot mothers trying to hide their babies under their coats. Dozens of women and children fell directly by his hand. After turning Krakow into a sea of blood, Amon returned to Plaszow. Now he wasn't just an officer, he was a king. He began constructing a hell on earth tailored to his sick preferences. He wanted Plaszow to be more than a labor camp. He wanted it to be a place where death was present in every single breath. After Göth finished with the Krakow ghetto, the survivors were rounded up and enslaved at Plaszow. With total control and almost zero oversight, Plaszow became Göth's private hunting ground. According to some unverified accounts, Göth wasn't just the king of the Plaszow hellhole, he also moonlighted as the Grim Reaper at another slaughterhouse, the Tarnów ghetto. Before the war, this was a peaceful home to 25,000 Jews, nearly half the city's population. But when the butcher got involved, that number evaporated, literally. He shipped 10,000 able-bodied people to Plaszow to be worked to death. By the time he decided to completely wipe out the ghetto, only about 8,000 terrified souls remained. September 1st, 1943, Magdeburg Square, a horror movie scene played out in broad daylight. Heavily armed soldiers surrounded the square, herding the wretched victims into the center like sheep waiting for the slaughter. By noon the next day, the death trains began to roll. Destination, Auschwitz. The journey was so horrific that less than half the people were still breathing when they arrived. And the lucky ones who survived that hell ride didn't escape their fate. Judged as useless and unfit for work, they were sent straight to the crematoriums the moment they stepped onto the platform. But the most chilling detail, the one that made his 1946 indictment so bloody, was Göth's personal conduct. Amidst the screaming chaos, Göth coolly drew his pistol. With the cruelty of a demon, he personally gunned down women and children. He shot them one by one, right there on the spot, as if it were some sick game to blow off steam. Plaszow is most infamous for an image that has become the symbol of inhuman cruelty. Amon lived in a beautiful villa perched on a hill, looking directly down into the concentration camp. Every morning, he had a sick routine. He would step out onto his balcony, shirtless, trousers hanging loose, a cigarette in one hand and a sniper rifle in the other. He'd take a deep breath of fresh air and then pull the trigger. He didn't shoot because they broke a rule. He shot because he felt like it. It was his morning coffee. To him, the lives of prisoners were meaningless numbers, moving targets for his amusement. Göth shot prisoners at random, on a whim. He never gave a reason. He would often stroll randomly through the barracks or workshops, drag people outside and execute them. Or he would just pick them off from his villa. Göth was also addicted to physical punishment. Whippings were a daily occurrence. Prisoners were routinely lashed 50 to 100 times for the slightest infraction. The whips Göth and his guards used were specially designed, tipped with ball bearings to inflict maximum damage. But that's not all. Armon had two close friends, Rolf and Ralph. These were two massive Great Danes, specially trained to kill. Göth would wander the camp with Rolf and Ralph, hunting for prisoners who were hiding or not working hard enough for his liking. The signal that a manhunt was about to begin was when he put on his Tyrolean hunting hat. At that sight, prisoners would scatter in terror. Göth trained these dogs to torture on command. In several instances, they mauled prisoners to death or tore chunks of flesh from their bodies. When Göth suspected the dogs were getting too friendly with their Jewish handler, he shot the handler dead. To him, those two dogs were worth more than thousands of human lives wasting away in the camp. Armon's brutality extended to insane collective punishments. He ordered guards to kill randomly. Once, Göth had his Ukrainian guards execute 50 prisoners on the spot. One survivor estimated that anywhere from 500 to 2,000 prisoners were executed for trying to escape or as collective punishment for someone else's escape attempt. If someone did manage to escape, he would order the escapee's entire work group to line up, count to 10, and personally shoot every 10th man. Usually, if a work detail returned short a man, the group was lucky if only the slow ones were killed, but most of the time, every single member of the group was shot by Göth or one of his subordinates. If a prisoner was caught smuggling food, they were shot. Other accounts describe acts of violence so senseless they defy belief. For the smallest infraction, he would beat a helpless victim in the face, watching with sadistic satisfaction as their cheeks swelled and turned purple, teeth fell out, and tears streamed down. During a morning roll call in front of everyone, he shot a Jewish man dead simply because, as he complained, the man was too tall. Then, as the man lay dying, Göth urinated on him. Once, he caught a boy who had diarrhea and couldn't control himself. Göth forced him to eat his own excrement and then shot him. He even aspired to turn Plaszow into a full-fledged death camp, but Göth invited SS commanders from the region to conduct executions at his camp because it was a safe and secluded location. Thousands of prisoners were marched to a place called Hujowa Gorka, Prick Hill, to be shot by Göth or his men. The slave laborers who worked directly for Göth were beaten mercilessly, even his house staff. Göth kept two maids to cook, clean, iron, and tailor for him. He shot a Jewish chef dead because the soup was too hot. He terrorized his two maids, Helen Jonas Rosenzweig and Helen Hirsch, keeping them in constant fear for their lives. Both were beaten daily. He used a whip or his fists, inflicting injuries like ruptured eardrums and nerve damage that left them disabled for life. He inflicted torture and suffering on anyone, enemies, servants, or total strangers who had done nothing to him. While compiling this file on Göth, our team had to pause multiple times. The cruelty is simply beyond imagination. I believe you're watching this not out of curiosity, but because you share our outrage. To help us build a community that respects truth and justice, I invite you to hit the subscribe button below. In the middle of this hell on earth, a strange relationship blossomed. Amon Göth met Oskar Schindler, a German industrialist who owned a nearby enamelware factory. Two men of the same age, same tall build, both lovers of fine wine, beautiful women, and money. They partied constantly at Amon's villa. Amidst the music and overflowing wine, Amon would cuddle with his mistress, Ruth Irene Calder. Ruth lived in luxury at the villa, seeing the crematorium smoke every day but choosing to close her eyes, viewing Amon as a perfect gentleman. But Oskar Schindler was different. Schindler saw right through Amon. He realized Amon's fatal weakness was greed, flattery, and bribery. Although Schindler was a Nazi Party member who originally hired Jews to save money on wages, he had begun to despise everything the Nazis stood for. So Schindler started offering bigger and bigger bribes to Göth to keep his Jewish workers safe. He used diamonds, cash, and luxury goods, shoving fistful of money into Amon's hand to transfer workers to his factory. In exchange, Göth set up a separate sub-camp for Schindler's staff, sparing them the daily terror of the main Plaszow camp. For Amon, money talked. Amon thought he was using Schindler to get rich. He took bribes to issue permits, to overlook small mistakes. But he never suspected that his own greed was helping Schindler save 1,200 Jews right under his nose. A killer who murdered for fun, and a savior who rescued with bribes. These two extremes coexisted in that luxury villa, creating one of history's darkest ironies. Göth used various prisoners for personal tasks: a private secretary, 2 maids, a groom for his horses. All of them survived thanks to Oskar Schindler. It is thanks to these individuals that the world knows the true extent of Göth's depravity. According to them, he would almost always kill someone in the interval between breakfast and lunch. But in this story, what saved 1,200 Jewish lives wasn't just Schindler's kindness, but also Amon Göth's laziness. Yes, you heard that right. This is the story of how a demon accidentally did good. The notorious butcher was bone-idle lazy and dumped the SS's most top-secret documents onto a Jewish prisoner to handle. That prisoner was Mitek Pemper, a Jew assigned as the personal secretary to the brutal commander. Pemper viewed his job as a death sentence. However, the position gave him access to letters from Göth's superiors in Berlin and connected him with Oskar Schindler. Realizing that the Jews at Plaszow were slated to be shipped to Auschwitz, he risked his life to persuade Schindler to switch his factory to producing anti-tank grenades. Together, they hatched a plan to move the business and as many Jewish workers as possible out of Plaszow to a factory in Brünnlitz, Czechoslovakia. It was Pemper who compiled the famous list, later known as Schindler's List, comprising 1,200 Jews deemed decisive for the Nazi war effort. This classification made them essential, saving them from certain death. After the war, Pemper testified at Göth's trial, leading to the commander's execution in 1946. It was Göth's irresponsibility that allowed the camp's death warrant to be leaked, opening the only door to survival for those on Schindler's List. On Hujowa Gorka, hill behind the camp, it is estimated that between 8,000 and 12,000 people were executed and buried under Amon's rule. It was a hill built of blood and bone. Up to this point, which moment haunts you the most? The sniper rifle on the balcony, or the satisfied smirk on his face as he took bribes to sell human lives? Amon's insatiable greed, the very thing that made him rich and helped Schindler save lives, was also the knife that would stab him in the back. He stole from the Jews, but under Nazi law, that property belonged to the state, to Hitler. Amon committed the ultimate sin, stealing from the boss. Eventually, his superiors caught wind of Göth's hoarding of loot and bribery. SS investigators descended on Plaszow to audit the camp and its policies. September 1944. The days of Plaszow are numbered. The Soviet Red Army is closing in. But the knock on Amon Göth's door didn't come from the Allies. It came from the Gestapo, Hitler's own secret police. On September 13, 1944, Amon was arrested. Here was a serial killer with the blood of tens of thousands on his hands. Yet he was handcuffed for corruption. The Nazis didn't care how many Jews Amon killed. They cared about how much gold and jewelry Amon had pocketed, loot that, under Hitler's law, belonged to the state. He was charged with theft and violating regulations regarding the treatment of prisoners. Is there anything more twisted than a regime where embezzlement is considered a graver sin than genocide? His mouth shouted Nazi slogans, but his hands were busy stuffing his pockets with the victim's property. In the end, was Amon Göth a true fanatic, or just a petty thief using the war as a cover? He was thrown in jail by his own comrades. Göth was scheduled to face SS Judge Georg Conrad Morgan. But as the war situation became critical and Germany began to crumble, the charges against him were dropped in early 1945. He was released, supposedly diagnosed by doctors with mental illness or diabetes. The once feared butcher was reduced to hiding in a sanitarium in Bad Tölz, Germany. It was a bitter twist of fate. He didn't fall in battle like a warrior. He fell because of his own bottomless greed. Being handcuffed by men in his own SS uniform was the ultimate humiliation for his massive ego. May 1945. The Third Reich collapses. The US Army sweeps into Bavaria. Amon Göth ditched his flashy SS uniform, disguising himself as a nobody to blend in and escape. But fate had scripted a cinematic encounter. Reports suggest that among the ranks accompanying the US Army was a group of Holocaust survivors turned Nazi hunters. One of them was Joseph Lukovich. The Americans initially lost track of Göth among the masses of prisoners, but in 1946, Lukovich tracked him down and demanded positive identification from former prisoners of the Krakow-Plaszow camp. Amon was dragged back into the light. He was extradited to Poland, the very place he had treated as his personal shooting gallery, to face judgment. If you've made it this far, I am truly grateful that you've spent over 20 minutes exploring this dark chapter of history with me. Drop a 9 in the comments so I know you're still watching. Let's look at the beginning of his reckoning. The Supreme National Tribunal of Poland held his trial in Krakow from August 27th to September 5th, 1946. The prosecutor listed a litany of crimes: mass murder, torture, genocide. Göth was convicted of being a member of the Nazi Party, which had been declared a criminal organization, and of personally ordering the imprisonment, torture, and extermination of individuals and groups. Trembling survivors pointed their fingers at him, recounting the mornings he shot people from his balcony and the times he unleashed his dogs to tear people apart. And how did Amon respond? With contemptuous silence and the same old broken record played by so many Nazis, "I was just following orders." He denied everything. He claimed to be a victim of circumstance. He didn't show a single second of remorse. He was a monster who, right up to his death, believed he was right. But the courtroom, wasn't a circus. The verdict was delivered: death by hanging. The date was set for September 13th, 1946, at Montelupich prison in Krakow, not far from the site of Plaszow. Amon Göth was led to the gallows. He remained defiant to the bitter end. Before the black hood was placed over his head, he shouted his final words, a pledge of loyalty so blind it was stupid: "Heil Hitler." Some accounts state he even stood in a defiant Nazi salute as he was hanged. The trapdoor swung open. The rope went taut. There was no miracle for the murderer. It was a humiliating, public death, exactly like the ones he had inflicted on thousands of innocents. Amon Göth was dead, but the dark shadow he cast over Plaszow would haunt humanity forever. Amon Göth died at the age of 37. His body was cremated, and his ashes were scattered into the river, drifting out to sea so that no one could ever worship his grave. But his ghost remains. Nearly 50 years later, in 1993, the movie Schindler's List was released. He became the global symbol of Nazi inhumanity. Perhaps even more painful is the legacy he left his family. His daughter, Monica Hertwig, and his black granddaughter, Jennifer Teege, have had to live their entire lives in the shadow of his sins. Jennifer went into a deep depression upon discovering that her grandfather was a monster who slaughtered thousands. They have written books and made documentaries, spending their lives trying to apologize for the sins of a man they never truly knew. The old adage, "you reap what you sow," finally came knocking at Amon Göth's door. His death sentence was carried out not far from the Plaszow death camp, the very hell he once ruled. But there is a twisted irony that wasn't unveiled until decades later. It is a truth that, if Amon Göth knew, would surely make him roll over in his grave and scream in pure rage. The biological granddaughter of the maniac obsessed with the purity of the German race is a black woman. If Amon Göth were alive to meet his granddaughter today, what would he do? Jennifer Teege answered that question herself with the chilling title of her memoir, "My Grandfather Would Have Shot Me." In the end, the butcher failed miserably in defining his own legacy. The bloodline he was so proud of now flows through the veins of a woman belonging to a race he despised, a woman who has dedicated her life to loving the very people he hated. I believe that even his execution pales in comparison to the sting of this irony. This right here is the most poetic and satisfying justice for Amon Göth.